Security footage shows 6 men in expensive suits carrying something heavy, something that weighs about 120 pounds down the marble staircase of a $30 million villa in Dubai. Their hands are shaking. Blood stains the white marble. One man keeps looking over his shoulder, terror written across his face. What they buried in the desert that night, wrapped in plastic and weighted down with concrete blocks, would remain hidden for 3 years until a sandstorm revealed bones that would destroy 6 of the most powerful families in the Emirates forever. This is the story of Fatima Hassan, a 28-year-old woman who walked into a house of horrors disguised as luxury. A woman who discovered that some prisons have golden bars and marble floors. A woman whose disappearance exposed the darkest secrets of Dubai's elite, and how her final desperate act of courage would bring down an entire trafficking network. But here's what the police files don't tell you. Here's what the news buried. Fatima Hassan never actually disappeared that night. She was still alive when they threw the first shovel of sand. Before we dive into this story, a story that took me 8 months to research, that kept me awake at night, that made me question everything I thought I knew about justice, I need to tell you something. Every week I pour my heart into these cases. I read through police files until my eyes burn. I interview families who trust me with their pain. I dig into stories that others won't touch because they're too dark, too complicated, too dangerous. And you know what keeps me going? It's you. It's knowing that somewhere out there, someone is listening. Someone cares about these forgotten victims. Someone believes that their stories matter. If you're new here and you believe that every victim deserves to have their story told with dignity and truth, please hit that subscribe button. Not just for me, but for Fatima, for every woman whose voice was silenced, for every family still searching for answers. Because when you subscribe, you're not just supporting a channel. You're joining a community of people who refuse to let these stories die in darkness. You're standing with victims who had no one else to stand with them. And if you're already part of this family, thank you. Thank you for believing that these stories matter. Thank you for caring when it would be easier to look away. Now, let me tell you about Fatima Hassan and the night that changed everything. Fatima Hassan was the perfect victim, and that wasn't an accident. She was 28 years old, from a small village in the Philippines where the average monthly income was less than what these men spent on a single dinner. She was Muslim in a country where being different made you invisible. She was desperate. Her father needed surgery. Her younger sister needed school fees. And the job offer that arrived through a reputable agency promised more money than she'd ever seen. But here's what made her perfect in their eyes. She was completely alone. No family in Dubai, no friends who would ask questions. No one who would notice if she simply disappeared. The job listing was everything a desperate woman could hope for. Private villa, single family, light housekeeping duties, generous salary, respected employers, even paid vacation time. What it didn't mention was the basement room with no windows, the security cameras in every corner, the front door that locked from the outside, the contract written in Arabic that she couldn't read, signed under the watchful eyes of 6 men who smiled like sharks. Fatima arrived at Dubai International Airport on March 15, 2019. She was carrying a small suitcase, her mother's prayer beads, and a photo of her family. In that photo, she's smiling. She has no idea that in 72 hours she'd be making her first desperate attempt to escape. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The villa was in Emirates Hills, where houses cost more than most people make in a lifetime. Marble floors, gold fixtures, a swimming pool that cost more than Fatima's entire village budget for a year. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was a trap. The moment she walked through those doors, Fatima Hassan ceased to exist as a person. She became property. She became a secret. She became a problem that 6 powerful men would eventually decide to solve permanently. But here's what they didn't know about Fatima Hassan. Here's what they underestimated. She had made one phone call before boarding that plane. One call that seemed innocent. One call that would save her life 3 years later. She had called her cousin Maria, who worked as a domestic worker in Saudi Arabia. And she had said 5 words that would change everything. If you don't hear from me, what Fatima discovered in the basement of that villa would explain why the previous 3 domestic workers had simply vanished. Why the agency had such a high turnover rate. why the job paid so well, and why she was about to become the fourth woman to disappear from that house. The rules were simple, too simple, and that should have been the first warning sign. Rule number 1, never leave the house without permission. Rule number 2, never use the phone without supervision. Rule number 3, never enter the basement storage room. Rule number 4, never ever speak to anyone outside the family about what happens in the house. But it was rule number 5 that made Fatuma's blood run cold. Never ask questions about the previous domestic workers. The Hassan family, no relation to Fatima, just a cruel coincidence, consisted of 6 men, brothers, cousins, business partners. They introduced themselves as importers, real estate developers, legitimate businessmen. They were charming, well-educated, spoke perfect English. They were also monsters. The oldest brother, Afid, was 45 years old, married with 3 children, who lived in London with his wife. He visited the villa every Tuesday and Thursday. Always arrived at 8 p.m., always left before dawn. The maid's room was directly below his preferred guest room. The second brother, Omar, was the enforcer. He had scars on his knuckles and a way of looking at Fatima that made her skin crawl. He was the one who explained the rules. He was the one who made it clear what would happen if she broke them. The others rotated through the house like it was a hotel, like it was their personal playground. Like the women who worked, there weren't human beings with names and families and dreams. But it was the basement that told the real story. Fatima wasn't supposed to go down there. But on her 4th day, while cleaning the main floor, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Crying. Quiet. Desperate crying coming from beneath the marble floors. The basement door was locked. But the key was hanging right there on the hook, like they wanted her to find it. Like they wanted her to know. What she found in that basement changed everything. 3 small rooms, each with a bed, a bucket, and iron bars on the windows. Fresh bedding. Recent food containers. Signs that someone had been living down there very recently, but it was the scratches on the walls that made her vomit. Names carved into the concrete. Dates, desperate messages. Maria Santos. Help me. 2018. Lin Wei. They said I could leave. 2017. Amara Okafor. I want to go home. 2016. 3 women. 3 names. 3 lives that had been erased from existence. And in the corner, still warm, still smelling of fear and desperation, was a small pile of belongings. A hairbrush, a small cross necklace, a passport photo of a young woman who looked exactly like Fatima. Same age, same hope in her eyes, same desperate smile. The woman's name was Rachel Fernandez. According to the employment records Fatima found stuffed in a drawer, Rachel had worked in the house for 6 months. Her file was marked, contract terminated, return to home country. But her belongings were still in the basement. Her passport was still in the drawer. Her shoes were still by the door. Rachel Fernandez had never left that house, just like Maria Santos, just like Lin Wei, just like Amara Okafor. And now Fatima understood why they had hired her so quickly, why they had been so generous with the salary, why they had been so eager to get her on that plane. She wasn't there to replace Rachel Fernandez. She was there to join her. But that night, as she lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, Fatima made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what happened to those women. She was going to get evidence. She was going to expose this house of horrors. And if she died trying, at least someone would know the truth. The security camera footage from that night shows Fatima in her room, pacing, planning, preparing. But it also shows something else. Something the police missed for years. She wasn't alone in that house. Someone else was still alive in the basement. Someone who had been waiting for help for months. Someone who was about to become Fatima's unlikely ally in the fight for their lives. The phone records told a story that reached into the highest levels of power in 3 different countries. This wasn't just about 6 men in a house in Dubai. This was about a network. Ahmed Hassan wasn't just an importer. He was a human trafficker. His business partner in London was laundering money through real estate deals. His cousin in Manila was recruiting women through fake employment agencies. His brother in Saudi Arabia was providing safe houses for transportation. But here's what made this network so effective, so invisible, so deadly. They were protected. The Dubai police had received 17 missing person reports about domestic workers in the past 3 years. 17 families asking questions. 17 files that were marked closed, subject returned to home country, without any investigation. The immigration records showed these women leaving Dubai on flights that didn't exist. Passport stamps from border crossings that were never made. Hotel records showing check-ins by people who were already dead. Someone in the government was helping them. Someone with access to official systems. Someone who could make people disappear from existence with a few keystrokes. But Fatima Hassan was different. She was smarter. She was more careful. And she had done something that none of the other victims had done. She had created a backup plan. Before leaving the Philippines, she had given her cousin, Maria, a sealed envelope. Inside was a list of her employers' names, their addresses, and a simple instruction: if you don't hear from me for 30 days, take this to the police. She had also set up a secret email account with an automatic message scheduler. If she didn't log in to cancel it every 2 weeks, an email would be sent to 3 different human rights organizations with all the information she had gathered. But that wasn't enough. She needed proof. She needed evidence. She needed something that would make the world pay attention. So she started documenting everything, every face she saw, every conversation she overheard, every car that came and went, every scream she heard from the basement. And she started looking for the other women, because they weren't all dead. She was sure of it. The basement rooms were being used. The food was being delivered. Someone was still alive down there. Someone who had been waiting for rescue for months. Someone who was about to become the key to bringing down the entire network. The breakthrough came on day 12. While cleaning Ahmed's office, Fatima found a laptop that had been left open. Financial records, wire transfers, and a list of names with status updates. Maria Santos, disposed 2018, Lin Wei. Disposed 2017, Amara Okafor. Disposed 2016, Rachel Fernandez, basement 2, awaiting transport. Rachel was still alive. She was still in the house. She had been there for 8 months, kept alive for reasons that Fatima didn't want to think about. But there was another entry that made her blood run cold. Fatima Hassan, new arrival, processing for disposal. They were going to kill her. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. As soon as they were done with her, she had to find Rachel. She had to get them both out of there. She had to expose this network before they became 2 more names carved into basement walls. But time was running out. The laptop showed a calendar entry for the following week. Clean house, final disposal, all units. They were going to kill everyone in that house. Clear out the evidence. Start fresh with new victims. Fatima Hassan had 6 days to save herself, save Rachel, and bring down a trafficking network that had operated with impunity for years. But she had done something none of the other victims had done. She had prepared for this moment. She had made contact with someone on the outside, someone who was already asking questions, and that someone was about to get a message that would change everything. Day 13 was when everything started to unravel. Fatima had been careful. She had been smart. She had been patient. But she had made one mistake. One tiny error that would either save her life or ensure she joined the names on the basement wall. She had looked at Omar Hassan the wrong way. It happened during breakfast. The brothers were discussing business, talking about shipments and inventory and disposal costs, like they were running a legitimate company. But Fatima had learned to read between the lines. She knew they were talking about human lives. When Omar mentioned needing to clear out the basement storage, Fatima's face must have shown something. Recognition, horror, understanding. Omar stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto hers. And in that moment, she knew that he knew that she knew. "You've been asking questions," he said quietly. "The cleaning lady at the neighbor's house mentioned you were asking about the previous workers." She hadn't been asking questions. She had been careful to avoid any contact with outsiders. But Omar Hassan was a predator, and predators know how to smell fear. "I haven't asked any questions," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I just do my job." "Your job," Omar repeated, standing up slowly. "Your job is to clean, cook, and keep your mouth shut. But you've been doing more than that, haven't you?" The other brothers were watching now, alert, dangerous, like wolves who had caught the scent of weakness. "I think it's time we showed you the full tour of the house," Ahmed said, including the basement. They knew. Somehow they knew she had been down there. They knew she had seen the rooms, the names, the evidence of what they had done. But here's what they didn't know. Fatima had been preparing for this moment. Hidden in her pillow was a small recording device, a gift from her cousin Maria, who had survived her own trafficking experience in Saudi Arabia. Hidden in her shoe was a GPS tracker, connected to an app on a phone she had secretly purchased with the small amount of money she had managed to save. And hidden in the false bottom of her suitcase was a complete record of everything she had discovered. Names, dates, photos, documents, everything she would need to bring down the network. If she survived the next 24 hours, the basement was worse than she had imagined. Not just the prison rooms, but a workshop, tools for disposing of bodies, industrial-grade cleaning supplies, a furnace that had been burning recently, and in the corner, chained to the wall, was Rachel Fernandez. She was alive but barely. 8 months of captivity had left her skeletal, traumatized, broken, but her eyes were still alert, still fighting. "This is what happens to girls who ask questions," Omar said, grabbing Fatima's arm. "This is what happens to girls who think they can leave." But as they pushed her toward the empty cell, Fatima saw something that gave her hope. Rachel was holding up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. She was counting down. She was preparing for something. She had her own plan. What happened next would be captured on the house's own security cameras. Evidence that would eventually convict all 6 men. Evidence that would expose the entire network. But it almost didn't happen. Because at 11:47 p.m., as Fatima was being forced into the basement cell, every light in the house went out. The power had been cut, the security system was down, and someone was inside the house who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who had been tracking the GPS signal in Fatima's shoe. Someone who had received the automatic email when she failed to cancel it. Someone who had been investigating the Hassan family for months. The rescue was about to begin, but it was going to get much worse before it got better, because the Hassan brothers had one final card to play. One last desperate act that would shock even the investigators who had seen everything. They were going to burn the house down, with everyone inside. At 2:15 a.m., Fatima Hassan made a decision that would save her life and expose a trafficking network that had operated in shadows for years. She was going to fight back. The power outage had lasted only minutes, but it was enough. In the darkness, she had managed to free herself from the zip ties, using a piece of broken glass she had hidden in her clothing. Rachel had done the same, working with the desperate strength of someone who had been waiting 8 months for this moment. But they weren't alone in the basement. The Hassan brothers had come down to check on their inventory when the power went out. Now they were trapped in their own dungeon, in complete darkness, with 2 women who had nothing left to lose. "You think you're going to escape?" Ahmed's voice echoed in the darkness. "You think anyone will believe you over us? We own this city. We own the police. We own the judges." But Fatima had something Ahmed didn't expect. She had the recording device still running, still capturing every word. She had the GPS tracker still broadcasting their location. And she had something else. She had Maria's phone number memorized. In the chaos of the power outage, she had managed to use one of the brothers' phones to send a single text message. "Villa 47, Emirates Hills. Basement. Help us." Maria Santos, working as a domestic worker in Saudi Arabia, received that message at 2:17 a.m. She had been waiting for it for 14 days. She had been preparing for it ever since her cousin had given her that sealed envelope. Within minutes, she had contacted the Philippine consulate, the Dubai police, and 3 different human rights organizations. She had given them the GPS coordinates, the house address, and the names of all 6 Hassan brothers. But the Hassan brothers had their own contingency plan. If the house was ever compromised, if the police ever came asking questions, they would activate the cleaning protocol. Gasoline in the basement, a single match, and any evidence of their crimes would be destroyed forever. At 2:45 a.m., Omar Hassan climbed the basement stairs carrying a jerry can of gasoline. The house was about to become a crematorium, but Fatima and Rachel had been busy in the darkness. They had found the brothers' emergency cash stash, over $50,000 in various currencies. They had found the keys to the basement arsenal. And they had found something else. A detailed client list. Names, addresses, and payment records for every person who had participated in the trafficking network. Government officials, business leaders, international buyers. The evidence that would bring down not just the Hassan brothers, but the entire system that had protected them. At 3:15 a.m., just as Omar was about to light the match that would destroy everything, they heard sirens in the distance. The Dubai police were finally coming, but they were still 10 minutes away. 10 minutes that would determine whether Fatima Hassan and Rachel Fernandez would survive to tell their story, or whether they would become 2 more names on a missing persons report. In the darkness of that basement, with the smell of gasoline filling the air, Fatima made her final desperate gamble. She started screaming, not for help. She knew no one would hear her. But she started screaming the names of every official she had heard the brothers mention. Every corrupt police officer. Every government contact. Every person who had enabled this network. She screamed their names into the recording device, creating a permanent record of the conspiracy that had allowed this horror to continue for years. And as Omar Hassan struck the match, she threw herself at the basement door, determined to fight for her life until the very last second. The explosion shook the entire neighborhood. But it wasn't the gasoline that exploded. It was something else entirely. Something that would change everything about this case. Something that would reveal the most shocking truth of all. Detective Sarah Al-Mansouri arrived at the scene at 3:47 a.m. to find a villa in Emirates Hills partially destroyed by an explosion. 6 men in handcuffs and 2 women who had been buried alive in the basement. Her first words were, "This case will end careers including mine." She was right. The explosion hadn't been caused by gasoline. It had been caused by a device that the Hassan brothers had installed as their ultimate insurance policy, a basement bomb designed to destroy all evidence if their operation was ever discovered. But the device had malfunctioned. Instead of destroying the evidence, it had blown open the basement walls, revealing a network of tunnels that connected to 3 other houses in the neighborhood. Houses that contained more basement prisons, more victims, more evidence. The Hassan trafficking network was larger than anyone had imagined. But Detective Al-Mansouri quickly realized that solving this case would be the most dangerous thing she had ever done, because the evidence that Fatima and Rachel had gathered implicated some of the most powerful people in the Emirates. The client list contained names that made her blood run cold. Government ministers, police commanders, judges, business leaders, foreign diplomats, people who had the power to make her disappear just as easily as they had made dozens of domestic workers disappear. But Al-Mansouri had something that the previous investigators hadn't had. She had living witnesses. She had recorded confessions. She had financial records. And she had a partner who was willing to risk everything to see justice done. The investigation revealed the full scope of the network. The Hassan brothers had been operating for over a decade. They had trafficked an estimated 200 women from the Philippines, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. They had sold them to buyers across the Middle East, Europe, and North America. But the most shocking discovery was still to come. The basement tunnels led to a 4th house, owned by a man named Dr. Rashid Al-Zara. He was a respected surgeon, a pillar of the community, a man who had received humanitarian awards for his work with refugees. He was also running a black market organ harvesting operation. The women who couldn't be sold as domestic workers or sex slaves were being used for another purpose. Their organs were being harvested and sold to wealthy patients who couldn't wait for legal transplants. That's what disposed meant on the Hassan brothers' records. That's what had happened to Maria Santos, Lin Wei, and Amara Okafor. They hadn't been killed quickly. They had been kept alive until their organs could be harvested. Dr. Al-Zara's patient record showed 47 illegal organ transplants in the past 5 years. Hearts, kidneys, livers, corneas. All from young, healthy women who had come to Dubai looking for legitimate work. But the investigation was being sabotaged from the inside. Evidence was disappearing. Witnesses were being intimidated. Files were being deleted from police computers. Someone high up in the Dubai police force was protecting the network. Someone who had been covering up their crimes for years. Detective Al-Mansouri realized that she couldn't trust anyone in her own department. She had to find another way to expose the truth. So she did something that could have ended her career and possibly her life. She leaked the entire case file to international media. The story broke simultaneously in London, Manila, and Washington, D.C. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings were damning. The financial records were undeniable. But the most powerful evidence was the testimony of Fatima Hassan and Rachel Fernandez, two women who had survived hell and were willing to risk everything to make sure it never happened to anyone else. The international pressure was immediate and intense. The Philippine government demanded answers. The U.S. State Department launched an investigation. Human rights organizations called for boycotts. But the people in power had one final card to play. One last desperate attempt to cover up their crimes. They were going to blame everything on the Hassan brothers. They were going to claim that the network was limited to just 6 men. They were going to sacrifice the brothers to protect the larger conspiracy. And they were going to try to make Fatima and Rachel disappear before they could testify. The evidence pointed to something much more sinister than anyone had imagined. This wasn't just about trafficking. This wasn't just about organ harvesting. This was about a systematic program of exploitation that reached the highest levels of power in multiple countries. And the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The final piece of evidence would expose a trafficking network that had operated in plain sight for over a decade, protected by corruption that reached the highest levels of power in 3 different countries. But first, Fatima Hassan had to survive long enough to tell her story. The threats started immediately after the story broke. Anonymous phone calls, cars following her to the safe house. Messages slipped under her door with photos of her family in the Philippines. The message was clear. Keep quiet or everyone you love will suffer. But Fatima had survived the basement of the Hassan villa. She had escaped from men who had killed dozens of women. She had outsmarted a network that had operated with impunity for years. She wasn't going to be silenced now. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rashid Al-Zara, the surgeon who had been harvesting organs, decided to cooperate with investigators. Not because he had found his conscience, but because he realized that his partners were planning to eliminate him to protect themselves. His testimony revealed the true scope of the network. It wasn't just about the Emirates, it was international. The Hassan brothers were just one cell in a larger organization that stretched from Manila to London to Dubai to Riyadh. They had contacts in government agencies, police departments, immigration offices, and courts across multiple countries. But the most shocking revelation was who was running the network. It wasn't the Hassan brothers. It wasn't even Dr. Al-Zara. It was someone who had been hiding in plain sight. Someone who had been publicly fighting against human trafficking while secretly profiting from it. The network was being run by Hassan al-Mahmoud, the director of the Dubai Office for Human Rights. The man who had been tasked with protecting victims of trafficking was actually one of the largest traffickers in the Middle East. For 12 years, al-Mahmoud had been using his position to identify vulnerable women, arrange their transportation, and ensure that any investigations into their disappearances were quickly closed. He had access to immigration records, police files, and international databases. He knew which women had family members who would ask questions, and which ones would simply disappear without anyone caring. He had been attending international conferences on human trafficking, sharing information with law enforcement agencies around the world, and winning awards for his humanitarian work, all while running a network that had trafficked over 2,000 women and harvested organs from hundreds of victims. But al-Mahmoud had made one fatal mistake. He had kept detailed records of every transaction, every bribe, every official who had been compromised. He had documented everything as insurance against his partners. Those records were hidden in a safety deposit box in Switzerland, and Dr. Al-Zara had the key. The files revealed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. Police commissioners who had been paid to close cases, immigration officials who had falsified exit records, judges who had dismissed charges, politicians who had blocked investigations, and foreign officials who had been purchasing organs for themselves and their families. The network had clients in London, Paris, New York, and Tokyo. Wealthy individuals who were willing to pay millions for organs harvested from young, healthy women who had come to Dubai looking for legitimate work. But the most damning evidence was the audio recordings that al-Mahmoud had made of his conversations with government officials. Hours of recorded phone calls where they discussed inventory, disposal, and cleanup operations. Conversations where they laughed about the women they were exploiting, where they joked about the families who would never know what happened to their daughters, where they planned new operations to increase their profits. The recordings were released to the media on the same day that Fatima Hassan and Rachel Fernandez were scheduled to testify before an international tribunal. The courtroom was packed with journalists, human rights activists, and family members of victims. The proceedings were broadcast live around the world. But as Fatima approached the witness stand, security guards received a message that would change everything. A bomb threat. The courthouse was being evacuated. The testimony would have to be postponed. The network was making its final play to silence the witnesses. But they had underestimated Fatima Hassan one last time. She had been preparing for this moment. She had been ready for them to try to stop her. And she had one final revelation that would destroy them all. The most shocking revelation was yet to come. Because Fatima Hassan hadn't just survived the trafficking network. She had been documenting it from the inside for much longer than anyone realized. The courtroom confession would silence the room and change everything the world thought it knew about human trafficking in the modern era. But it wasn't Hassan al-Mahmoud who made the confession. It was Fatima Hassan herself. As she took the witness stand, despite the bomb threat, despite the evacuation order, despite the armed guards trying to clear the courtroom, she revealed the truth that no one had expected. "My name is Fatima Hassan," she said, her voice steady and clear, "but I am not a victim. I am an undercover investigator for the International Justice Mission. I have been working to expose this trafficking network for 3 years." The courtroom erupted. Journalists were shouting questions. Lawyers were objecting. The judge was calling for order. But Fatima continued speaking, her voice rising above the chaos. "I volunteered for this assignment because my sister was trafficked and murdered in Dubai in 2016. Her name was Amara Hassan. She was listed in the police files as Amara Okafor, but she was my sister, and I came here to find out what happened to her." The pieces suddenly fell into place. The phone call to her cousin, the backup plans, the hidden recording devices, the GPS tracker. Fatima hadn't been lucky. She had been prepared. "I have been gathering evidence for the International Justice Mission for 3 years. I have recordings of over 200 hours of conversations. I have financial records, client lists, and documented evidence of government corruption in 4 different countries." She had been working with a team of international investigators who had been tracking the network for years. The automatic email system wasn't just a backup plan. It was a real-time reporting system that had been feeding information to law enforcement agencies around the world. Rachel Fernandez hadn't been randomly imprisoned in the basement. She was another undercover investigator who had been working to document the organ harvesting operation. The entire rescue operation had been planned and coordinated. The power outage, the explosion, the perfectly timed police response. It had all been orchestrated to gather the final pieces of evidence needed to bring down the entire network. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. "The Hassan brothers are not the leaders of this network," Fatima continued. "They are not even the decision makers. They are employees. The real leaders are sitting in this courtroom right now." She turned and pointed directly at 3 men in the gallery. Men who had been introduced as human rights observers. Men who had been publicly supporting the prosecution. Those men are the actual leaders of the trafficking network. They have been using their positions as human rights advocates to identify potential victims and cover up their crimes. The men tried to leave the courtroom, but security guards blocked the exits. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Financial records, recorded conversations, documented transactions. The network had been completely exposed. Not just the Hassan brothers, not just Dr. Al-Zahra, not just Hassan al-Mahmoud, but the entire international operation. The trial lasted 8 months. The evidence was overwhelming. The verdicts were unanimous. All 6 Hassan brothers were sentenced to life in prison. Dr. Al-Zahra received 25 years. Hassan al-Mahmoud was sentenced to death. The 3 network leaders were each sentenced to life without parole. But the most significant outcome was the international cooperation that emerged from the case. New laws were passed. New protocols were established. New protection systems were created for domestic workers. The Fatima Hassan Protocol became the international standard for protecting domestic workers and preventing trafficking. But Fatima Hassan herself disappeared from public view after the trial. Some say she returned to her work as an undercover investigator. Others believe she retired to a quiet life with her family. The truth is, she's still out there, still fighting, still working to expose networks that exploit vulnerable people. Because there are more Hassan brothers out there, more victims who need rescue, more families who deserve answers. And as long as there are people willing to profit from human suffering, there will be people like Fatima Hassan willing to risk everything to stop them. Fatima Hassan's story reminds us that behind every headline about human trafficking is a real person who fought for survival. Her courage didn't just save her own life, it exposed a system that had operated in shadows for years and saved thousands of potential victims. But here's what haunts me about this case. Here's what keeps me awake at night. For every trafficking network that gets exposed, there are dozens more that remain hidden. For every victim who gets rescued, there are hundreds more who are